Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure having you at our breakfast forum. In fact, our breakfast forum has the longest tradition of all the program we have at IGE, but it was interrupted by COVID-19. We now have a more sort of virtual forum seminars than this actual in-person breakfast gathering. We are so very delighted to have a distinguished speaker from Washington, my second home, actually, spending a long time over there. Mr. Clay Lowery is currently a Senior Executive Vice President at IIF. IIF, many of you will know very well. That's the global organization working on improving financial environment, if you like, for the world and particular countries, member countries, and from regulation to investment guidelines on many other areas they're working on. Actually, the top management of IIF has traditionally brought senior officials from U.S. Treasury Department. You are not the exception to that. So in a way, that is very good because then there's a clear continuation of the kind of work that you have done in the government and what you are doing these days around the world, helping many financial institutions, banks especially, to be more globally interconnected, following your very effective networking exercise. So I'm so very happy to have our distinguished speaker. Before the topic we have is as announced, the prospect for the future leadership of U.S. dollar in the face of reshaping of geoeconomic environment we have now. But given Mr. Lowery's background, for our Q&A session, you're welcome to raise any issues that would be of your interest. I think he'll be very happy to touch upon the most timely and important issues that we face here in Korea this morning as well. Now, briefly introducing our speaker, a little more than what I said already. In addition to his IIF top management role, by the way, your organization has about 400 member institutions from over 60 countries. That's pretty much the most of the countries above middle income countries around the world. Now, his most prominent career was with U.S. Treasury as Assistant Secretary for International Affairs at U.S. Treasury Department. Now, during his tenure there, he led a team of 200 people. This is a lot more than what I thought. 200 excellent staff supporting him to carry out a number of issues, including economic and financial diplomacy, monetary and banking issues, currency strategy, and trade and investment practices. Actually, the last point may be of great interest to our people here, so you're welcome to raise that question after his presentation. He was in charge of reviewing all the foreign M&As that affect U.S. national security interest, by chairing the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. So that is CFIUS. He also was appointed by quite a few presidents to serve as U.S. representatives to multilateral institutions, IMF, World Bank, EBRD, even Paris Club. I used to represent World Bank at the Paris Club meetings. He has a very rich experience. He's currently also serving as a non-resident senior advisor at CSIS. You're very familiar with the CSIS, Victor Cha, Korea chair there. And they are really doing a lot of good work on geopolitics, especially in Asia. Clay received his BA from University of Virginia and graduate degree from London School of Economics. Now, without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Lowery for his presentation.
Thank you very much, and also thanks to IG for hosting this breakfast and for having me here. We've done work with them, with your team over the years, and it's always been terrific. So I enjoy being back in Korea. So just one story from my time at the Treasury Department. I handled the financial part of the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement. So that would have been 2005, 2006, I think. It might be 2004. But so my claim to fame there is that I believe President Trump called it the second worst trade agreement that's ever been reached. So while I helped negotiate the second worst trade agreement, I was not in charge of the worst trade agreement in U.S. history. So I have that going for me. So I will. I'll get to my presentation in a second. I came a few weeks ago. The IMF and the World Bank had its annual meetings in Washington. The IIF, where I work now, we work with banks, insurance companies, asset managers, sovereign wealth funds, et cetera, from around the world. We hosted a 4-day meeting, bringing different views and so forth. And I thought that just a couple of highlights of some of what I heard, and then I'll go into kind of a little bit on the dollar. And as June said, I am happy to answer any questions, including about trade and President Trump's approach, and maybe what are some of the what I would call guardrails against the approach that President Trump's using. But let me first start off with, so the conversation in Washington basically was a fewfold. First was, unlike April of this year, when there was a lot of concern about the global economy, particularly the U.S. economy, and a lot of it exacerbated by the Tariff Liberation Day from President Trump. If you fast forward to 3 weeks ago, it was much more positive. The global economy has proven to be much more resilient than had been expected. The U.S. economy in particular has been much more resilient. I think that was for a few different reasons. The first is, without a doubt, the rise of investment in artificial intelligence is huge. And it's driven the U.S. economy, but it's also driven the global economy, I think. Will all of these investments pay off? The answer is no. I mean, there's no way. But will some of them or most of them pay off? And then will that have a further down the line impact on productivity? And that's what I think there's a lot of positive aspects about that. Second is the imposition of tariffs that we've seen all over the world by the United States really didn't go into effect in a major way until August of this year. So they didn't go into effect in April or May or June. It waited until August. That in the broadest sense. And so because of that, are there potential lags in the system on what that impact will be? And that we don't know right now, but it's obviously had some impact. It's just a matter of not as much as some economists had earlier predicted. Third is the fiscal situation in a number of countries, including the United States, has been more positive and more stimulative. And that is actually, in the US, we got more clarity on our fiscal situation. It's not great in the long term, but in the short term, it's stimulative. And so I think that's helped the economy. And then if you look at corporate earnings, the balance sheets in the United States are good. Corporate earnings are high. And so all in, you had a very positive aspect with some noted risks. I would say a few. Risk one is the tariff regime of the U.S., the uncertainty that it has raised, and what exactly the pricing elements of that will be is still a tough thing, and it could become a big risk. Secondly, valuations on assets have gotten pretty high, and if there is a fall off in those assets, whether it's equities particularly or bonds, could that have a major downward impact on the economy, including on consumption? So that's kind of more of a risk. Third is all the geopolitical risks that we all hear about all the time, the U.S.-China relationship, the North Korea, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And then fourth is that there are economies in the world that are huge economies that aren't doing well. We were just talking a little bit at breakfast about some of the European economies. Can they make the adjustment to a more competitive world where the United States continues to evolve competitively? China is evolving competitively, but Europe doesn't seem to be. And so I think we'll see on that front. I'm happy to talk about the trade, but why don't I do a little bit on the dollar? So the dollar was a conversation in Washington, but not a big conversation. And I think it's because there's been the biggest part of the conversation is what does the rise of stable coins mean for the dollar, and also how should we be thinking about stable coins in the global monetary and economic system? But before I get to that, let me just, so I'm going to ask whoever's got the slide deck if they could, okay. So what this is supposed to represent is there is this narrative out there, the end of dollar dominance. So I made a joke when I was sending, right in my written remarks, which was, in the United States, there are two certainties in life. One, taxes. The other is death. I would argue you could add a third certainty, which is every 5 years to 10, somebody says the dollar is no longer dominant. I don't think that that's the case. That doesn't mean it won't be the case, so I guess it's not going to be certain. It won't be the case at some point, but right now it still is. So if you look at this chart, the dark blue is the dollar's role in things like reserves, cross-border trade, debt markets, stablecoin, backing of stablecoin, et cetera. And the structural foundations of the dollar in the United States are still dramatic. What are they? A good, although sometimes rule of law system. They are safe assets. The U.S. financial system has global reach around the world. And the markets in the United States are very deep and very liquid. And so because of that, it's hard to displace the dollar, and I will make another point about that later. But so the talk and discussion about whether the dollar, because of declines, is fading away as dominant, I think are very premature at this point in time. And I think that this chart describes it. And I think it's mainly because the dollar remains the core operating system of the global financial markets. All right, that's slide 2 right there. Thank you for whoever put that forward. So there's the dollar weakness. If you look on one chart, it basically matches the advanced economies. The other chart, actually the interesting thing is the emerging market countries have appreciated, their currencies have appreciated against the dollar more so than, so this is comparing Donald Trump 1.0 versus Donald Trump 2.0. And you see 1.0, they match each other on the advanced economies, but there is a divergence on emerging markets. And I think that actually goes to something which is, so why is there softness in the dollar this year? In some respects, when you put tariffs up, economically, the dollar should actually increase or appreciate. But that actually hasn't happened. And the reason I think is because there's been so much uncertainty from the United States on tariffs that it has undermined a little bit the strength of the dollar. But the point on the second part of the chart is that the emerging market countries have actually shown a lot more resilience than I think most people had thought would be the case. And so because of that, the dollar has declined, but it's just not as, but that doesn't mean that it is cyclical, not necessarily structural. And I think if you go to the next chart, you'll see, so that this represents the dollar as the underlying asset in global debt issuance. If you look at the chart on the right, you will see that's emerging market countries that are actually issuing external debt backed by the dollar or backed by the euro. And you'll see that actually in this year, the year that the dollar is declining, emerging market issuance is up. And that's because that emerging market countries still want to issue in dollars. So that kind of goes back to my point, which is it's cyclical, not structural. The other point that I think is worth raising is what are the currencies that are rising to potentially be alternatives to the dollar? So at this point in time, the euro, the yen, the Swiss franc, they're just not, I mean, the euro is the closest one to being a competitor, but they're not. The Chinese yuan is roughly, it's a tiny percentage, just tiny percentage of the global financial world, and a lot of that is because of the capital controls that exist in China. So the two other ideas of alternatives are, one, gold, and we've seen gold prices skyrocket this year. But of course, gold is it's not a great, it's a good store of value, but of course it's not a liquid asset. And if you look at reserves, gold has actually increased pretty significantly in terms of reserves in the world, but that is due to what would be described as valuation effects, as opposed to there happens to be like more countries are buying more gold. It's just that the value of gold is practically doubled, and so that is just making it a higher part of the percentage. The more interesting one is stablecoins. Maybe there you go. All right. I will get to this chart in a second, but so stable coins have existed for a while. What happened in the United States earlier this year was significant in that the Congress and the president passed legislation that allowed stablecoins to be basically to exist in the United States and to have a framework. So before, if you issued a stablecoin and you did it in the United States, there wasn't a regulatory framework. Instead, regulators would do regulation by what's called enforcement. Well, that provides all sorts of uncertainty. But now there is a regulatory framework. And so this has led towards a concern globally, which is that the United States is now, the dollar backs almost all stablecoins. So stablecoins can be backed by almost anything. But it turns out over 90% of stablecoins in the world are backed by the US dollar. The two largest stablecoin providers or issuers in dollar-backed stablecoins are Tether and Circle. Those two, this chart basically says that the holders of U.S. securities, so dollar-backed stablecoins are backed by 90-day paper, 90-day treasury bills, but the holders of those currencies have climbed up. You see that red line on the bottom. That red line continues to climb. That is the two biggest stablecoin providers. And they are starting to become if you did it on a country basis, the 11th or 12th largest country in the world that actually holds U.S. treasuries. Now, they will hold them on the front end of the curve, 90-day paper, as opposed to longer term. But it is still interesting. In some respects, then, as these countries get bigger, as these issuers get larger on holding treasuries, they are not de-dollarizing, they are re-dollarizing. So they are getting more and more dollars. They're just doing it through a different technology than it was the case in the past. And what are stable coins being used for? They're actually not used that much in the United States. They're used outside the United States. They're used for cross-border payment purposes. Remittances, so actually where you see a lot of dollar coins are countries in Africa and South Asia and in Latin America even. So what I would argue, and I could be wrong of course, is that we are rewiring the system. And it is a multi-layered dollarization, whether it is physical dollars, financial, digital, but it's a network. So the US currency is no longer a currency, or probably hasn't been a currency, it's a network across the world. And so because of that, I think it'll be hard to displace and to de-dollarize, because a network is much harder to displace than a currency. Where could I be wrong? The biggest place I could be wrong, I think, is the problem of US debt and how that affects our economy. So US debt right now is 100% of GDP, which is basically the high since World War II. And within 2 years, 3 years, unless something changes dramatically, we will be at the high since World War II. Neither the Republicans nor the Democrats take our debt and fiscal situation seriously. And could that over time undermine confidence in the dollar? And that's possible. A second area would be is the treatment that the United States is providing to countries, as we see with the tariff negotiations and so forth, could undermine countries wanting to continue to do business in dollars. And maybe you see that with the rise of gold. So Russia invades Ukraine, the United States and Europe freeze Russian assets, including central bank assets, and now they're looking at trying to figure out how to utilize those assets, which is close to an expropriation. And so could that have an impact for countries around the world to try to find different assets. And so I think that helps explain why gold prices have gone up. But those are some ways you can undermine it. But right now, my main point would be to say that de-dollarization, at least on a structural basis, is still a ways off. Why don't I stop there?
Yeah.
Take questions. I'm happy to take questions, as Yoon said, on the dollar, but I'm also happy to talk about trade or what do you ask me about? Mamdani? The Mamdani election? Yeah. So I'm happy to, I can answer anything you want. So anyway, thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your excellent presentation. Essentially, key messages that you shared with us toward the end of your presentation, that is that dollar's dominance will be there, at least for quite some time. So de-dollarization is off. Rather, we'll have a re-dollarization, perhaps a rewired dollar dominant system will sustain for quite some time, unless there's some issues pop up. You mentioned a couple of them, some sort of caveats or risk. But overall message there is that U.S. Dollar's dominance will be with us, irrespective of geopolitical tensions, digital financial innovation like stable coins, alternative assets, most likely to sustain. So that message, appreciate that. And any questions on his presentation and on other issues related to Korea or Korea-U.S. relationship? Ambassador Ho? Yeah.
Thank you very much for your very informative presentation, as well as your willingness to open up the field for any kind of questions. So,
including Mamdani.
Including Mamdani. Actually, one of your track record is that you are involved in the second worst trade deal, according to President Trump, with the Korea-U.S. FTA negotiation. But when the President Trump said it's the second worst, if we paraphrase it in plain English, it means well-balanced trade negotiations. And you have been a very reasonable professional voice during those negotiations, which many Koreans involved in that negotiation still very much appreciate that. But having said that, we had a recent trade deal with the U.S. again during the APEC summit meeting, and the President Trump seems to be very satisfied with that. So if we paraphrase it in plain English, something might be wrong with that trade negotiations. More specifically, we agreed to invest $350 billion in the U.S. Out of that $350, $200 billion is by Korean government. And in the sector in the U.S., that U.S. will decide. And once we make investment, if whatever loss, we'll bear the full loss. But if we are lucky enough to have some profits, the profits will be shared 50-50 between U.S. and Korea. You've been involved in all these trade negotiations, and you sort of mentioned during your dollar presentation that one of the risks of the dollar going into the future is that U.S. might have alienated so many other countries, and there's an anger out there. So when you put those things together, what is your own view and assessment of these negotiations, the result of trade negotiations? It's not Mamdani, so it's much easier.
Yeah. Let me say that I'm going to say something controversial, and then I will try to get a little more specific. My controversial part is it will not stop. The United States will, under President Trump, will continue to negotiate on tariffs, with as many countries as he possibly can. And he will continue to pressure and cajole and so forth. And so when an agreement is reached, my view, this is my view, not anybody else's, not even my institute's view, that agreement will, I mean, there's a positive aspect of having a very thin agreement that is negotiated at a leader level, which is you can do it very quickly. There's a negative aspect, which is it doesn't have much resilience. And so, and that would worry me. Now, so it worries me about the U.S. negotiations with China that took place last week. It worries me about the U.S. negotiations with Europe, with Canada. We've seen that with Canada, and to some extent Korea. Now, why do I say that? So there are times that Korea will do something or the U.S. will do something that will anger the other country. It just happens. And you don't know when it's going to happen, but it happens. And the normal way you would handle that is countries would discuss these problems, maybe argue about them, maybe take action, but most of the time not. And they would try to figure out a way forward. There would be some apologies, what have you. President Trump's style is, you've wronged me, I'm going to put a tariff on that. And that's what happened to Canada just 2 weeks ago. They ran a commercial on, and it wasn't even run by the federal government, it was run by a state government. And President Trump got mad at that commercial and added 10% tariffs to Canada. If you're Mark Carney, how do you deal with that? I mean, he did. He apologized, but the thing is, like, he has no control over that, and so, so that is my biggest issue, is that I don't think it'll stop, and this leads me to, and then I'm going to get to your question specifics. There are those that think that President Trump is doing the tariffs because he wants leverage. I agree with that. There are those that think President Trump is doing tariffs because he wants retribution, retaliation, because he feels like the United States has been wronged over the years on trade issues. I agree with that. There are those that believe that President Trump is trying to change the trade deficit. I agree with that. There are those that think that President Trump is trying to raise more fiscal revenue through a tariff mechanism as opposed to a taxation mechanism. I agree with that. And now you could give me, and he wants to return manufacturing to the United States. I agree with that. He wants to do all of those things. But and that's what my problem is. I think that it is just an ideological issue for the man. And he's the president, and that ideological issue doesn't ever stop because it's ideological. And so if you have a problem, put a tariff on it. And no economist, even President Trump's economists, don't agree. I mean, some of them will say, well, there's some national security issues here, so it's probably a good thing. There's some leverage points here, so it's probably a good thing. But that's why I just don't think that there's any, you won't get clarity. Now, in terms of the Korea agreement that was reached, and I don't know the particulars that well, but the cash infusion into the United States economy from Korea has a number of impacts, I would think. First of all, I have absolutely no idea where that money's going to go. Zero. I don't think anybody in the United States has a clue where it's going. I don't think President Trump even knows where it's going to go. It's a weird system that we've never really seen before, so I'm not sure exactly how it's going to work. All right. So the second problem is, how is it going to be financed here in Korea? And I'm sure that this is going to give your central bank a heart attack. And also, I mean, ironically, because you run a trade surplus with the United States, that is a way of providing cash. In order to actually do the investment. In some respects, you would need to run maybe a higher trade surplus, which of course is exactly what President Trump said he doesn't want to happen in the first place. Was it a good idea for Korea to actually sign on to this agreement? It's easy for me to say, yeah, you should just fight, but I get it. I mean, the United States has a lot of leverage over Korea, particularly on national security issues. And so, but will that hold? I don't know. I mean, well, it's hard to know. And will we continue to put tariffs onto Korea? Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we are going to have 15% tariffs, but we have right now investigations into all sorts of other sectors. The one that I find, the one I can't stop, I laugh at ironically, is that we have now found that there's a national security reason for importing wood into the United States. So that thing right there, that's a national security issue for the United States. That podium there. And so now that we don't import wood from Korea, or if we do, it's some tiny amount. We import it mainly from Canada. But those type of sectors, we're going to continue to do that no matter how the Supreme Court case that we saw arguments on comes out. We'll continue to do those type of sectoral tariffs. Some of them are going to hit Korea, no question, whether it's on automobiles or steel. So I'll stop there.
Okay. By the way, one sort of big uncertainty that is left at the moment is the decision on the part of the Supreme Court on Mr. Trump's emergency executive power, whether that is to be sustained, or just possibly. Well, I don't know. If that happens, that's a huge implication for U.S. Strategy and the countries that have made or continue to negotiate on trade deals. But what is your sense? But there's many stories coming out. By the way, two lower courts have rejected Mr. Trump's power there. Yeah. So it's now up to Supreme Court.
So let me broaden your question out. Yeah. So this is something I was going to mention and I didn't say it. So in my opinion, there are four guardrails on President Trump's tariff policies. I mean, everything I just said, I stand by what I just said, but there are four guardrails. Guardrail one is the markets. And we saw that in April when the bond market in the United States went haywire. I'm not sure that makes sense. So crazy. And when the markets went down, particularly the bond market, President Trump did back off on some of the tariffs. Second guardrail is politics. What he's doing from a trade and tariff policy, is it having an impact on politics? Before 2 days ago, the answer was there was no stopping President Trump from a political standpoint. However, one lesson from Mamdani and some of the other Democrats that won on Tuesday night was they focused a lot on cost of living issues, a lot. And tariffs have kept our inflation rate in the United States at a higher level. Now, will that impact President Trump's thinking? My view is no, but it could over time because now there's some political damage being done by what he's done. A third area, which I'm going to skip for a second, will be negotiations. And then the fourth is the one you just raised, which is the legal issues. All right, so since I see there's a press table, I won't say the point I was about to, because I would want to be off the record on this. But and anyway, it was a half joke, but it was kind of the main thing I would say on the legal issues is, so since February this year, maybe March, and I'm not a lawyer, I have predicted President Trump was going to lose on this issue. I had a lot of people who told me I was wrong. I just said it doesn't add up. And he has lost every single case. He has lost every appeal. He has lost everything. They went to the Supreme Court yesterday. My view is the Supreme Court's questioning of his lawyers and of the lawyers on the plaintiff side would suggest that I'm right. And now, why is this legal problem? So in the United States, the Constitution says that the Congress has the ability to raise taxes as well as duties, which are tariffs. Congress can delegate some of that authority to the executive branch, which it has done. But IEPA never actually says that. It only says the word regulation. And so the problem is, if you regulate something, you have opened up and you say that regulations means taxation, means tariffs, or regulation then could mean taxation. It opens up a whole new world that seems to me that goes against the Constitution. And so that's why I've been kind of feeling like it would change. Now, the one area where I could be wrong on is if some Supreme Court justices say, we need to defer to the president on foreign policy type of issues, and so this is a foreign policy issue, so we should defer. All right, let's just say President Trump loses, the Trump administration loses this case, which, if you were to put a gun to my head, I would say I think will happen. I could be wrong, but let's just say he does. Three things will happen. Thing number one, there will have to be some sort of a refund for everybody who's paid tariffs under the IEPA statute since, I guess, February, technically, when we put tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China, on fentanyl tariffs on them using this authority. But everything since then, all the reciprocal tariffs, all that, the stuff that went into effect in August, that's all will need to be refunded to the importers. The second thing that'll happen is the president and his people are almost assuredly going to put in place a different tariff, which is called the 122 tariffs. These are tariffs that can be up to 15%. They can be done for every country. The only thing is they can only last for 150 days. So they can't, so it's not like other tariffs where you're putting them in place forever. So this is a Band-Aid. The third thing that'll happen is during the Band-Aid period, the president will probably launch what are called 301, if not 338 tariff actions, which are basically just different types of tariffs that are put on, but there's supposed to be an investigation process, and it takes longer to do. And so President Trump's problem is those processes are processes, and they just take a while. He wants something that he can do like that. And you saw again, Canada runs an advertisement, 10% tariffs. Well, you can't do that if you have to launch an investigation and have to try to figure that out. And so in the end, he will rebuild most of the tariffs that are now in place. It won't be as extensive and probably not as easy to understand. I mean, they're not easy to understand now, but so I think he's going to lose, but I think he will still find a way to get around most of it in the long term.
Okay, got it. Got the message. Okay, Mr. Kwan. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for sparing your time to give us most important issue, future of U.S. dollar. And until when I was Vice Minister of Finance Economy, 2005, I used to meet Charles Dallara very often. So I know the importance of IIF. Mm-hmm. And my question, the role and the importance of U.S. economy is already very big power. The share of American population in the world, only 4%, while the share of GDP in the world, 25%. That means U.S. is living better than, 6 times better than other average countries. But Trump is trying to threaten American people that all other countries taking advantage of U.S. economy, U.S. And therefore you should invest in USA. But I met many Korean investors, businessmen who already invested or who is seeking to invest. Their problem, they cannot find the relevant high-tech engineers. So the cost will go very high. And what if you are taking all the important industries, including IT, AI, but in addition to that, the traditional manufacturing industry, shipbuilding, automobiles, the chips and everything. Do you think it is achievable and then the sustainable? And what is your expectation if the government change after 3 or 4 years, whether it can be continued to tariff war? Thank you.
Okay. Those are great and very difficult questions. Thank you very much. Charles Dallara was a very, very good official at the U.S. Treasury Department before he went to IIF. And I have not seen Charles in a few years, but I just was told when I was in China last that he was traveling around in Asia, so I was glad to hear that he's healthy and doing well. So let me, in terms of is it achievable for the United States to be a technological leader, particularly on artificial intelligence issues, to establish, I guess, our manufacturing expertise and knowledge and so forth, and whether it's advanced manufacturing or a lower level in manufacturing, and is it sustainable? No. It's so first of all, manufacturing in the United States is actually what President Trump sometimes doesn't get, is actually as high as it was today as it was 30 years ago in terms of output, manufacturing output. It just doesn't employ as many people. And so because of technological innovations, productivity innovations, we are not able to, people just have moved on and are doing different things. And so that part, I don't know how you reestablish that. Howard Lutnick, his Commerce Secretary, said on television, we should basically, instead of Apple iPhones, which the intellectual property, the amazing ability to figure out how to make the phone better and do things, is all taking place largely in California. Largely, not fully. The putting little screws on the phone to make sure that the phone sticks together and so forth is not happening in the United States. And Howard Lutnick said we should bring that back. Well, that's great, but how do you do that? And do people want those jobs? And so I just think that some of the ideas behind this are strange. And so, I get the United States wanting to be a leader in these technological fields. I get that the United States wants to be a leader in manufacturing. But how to achieve that is by using a tariff mechanism and these kind of forced investment theory, I guess, forcing investment, I don't know if that'll work, and is it sustainable? I don't think so. The tough question you asked is what happens 3 years from now, whether it's a Democrat or another Republican. I don't really know. So when President Trump was president the first time, and then President Biden came in, President Biden is a absolute protectionist, doesn't believe in free trade, and I mean, that's my view. So he's just like Donald Trump, from a completely different background, different angle, and so forth. So he didn't change what we did. Now he engaged with the world in a different way. Instead of engaging in the world by punching somebody in the face, that's the Donald Trump way. He said, hey, I'm going to shake your hand, let's engage. But he wasn't going to do anything on free trade. And in fact, he actually did increase some of the tariffs on China, at least. What I don't know is whether, if the tariffs that President Trump is putting in place now, if they have an impact, especially on our cost of living in the United States, you will start to see the erosion of the policy of tariffs. What I don't think you'll see is the U.S. moving back towards pursuing free trade agreements and market access type of agreements. I think we got a long way to go before that happens again. But in terms of whether they will hold in place all these different tariff policies, where they're going to say to Korea, where's my $20 billion? It's now 2030. I don't know about that. I think there's a possibility of some of that being brought back, and by the way, including by Republicans, not just by Democrats.
Okay. Okay. Or Mr. Song, yes, this president of newspaper.
Okay, sure.
Thank you very much for your impressive presentation. I'm not an economist. I'm from the media. So I want to ask a question related to current issue. As you know well, today marks the 1-year anniversary of Trump election victory last year, and also more than maybe 7 months have passed since the Liberation Day. So many pundits, including even Korean professionals, predict that China will win aftermath of the maybe U.S.-China trade war. But I wonder what kind of view you have in this matter. Who, Trump or Xi Jinping, is winning, and who will be the winner? Maybe after 3 years, when Trump will finish his term. So, personally, I'm not agree. I do not agree with that kind of opinion that China will be the ultimate winner. But actually, I'm curious about your personal perspective in this matter. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
No,
Well, so if it was my druthers, I don't want either to be the winner. I would want, and maybe actually a better way of putting this, I want both to be the winner, right? So I have nothing against the Chinese people. And I certainly have nothing against the American people. I'm an American. And so I was talking about my guardrails earlier on. One of the guardrails is negotiations, and how do you handle those negotiations? It has been interesting that China has handled them by fighting and by trying to find choke points in the global economy, rare earths being the easiest example of that. And it has had an impact. There is no question on that. I have also been of the view that one of the ideas in the United States is that there is consensus among Republicans and Democrats that China is a huge problem for the world. And with many, this is probably not consensus, that it is something close to a second Cold War. And so because of that, the United States should find ways to decouple or de-risk or what have you away from China. I don't think President Trump believes any of that. And the last week was a good example to show maybe I'm right. I think he's of the view like, hey, China is the biggest economy in the world besides the United States. I need to do business. There are transactions we can do together. They're going to get mad at me on some things. I'm going to get mad at them on some things. And we'll leverage each other back and forth, and we'll have to find ways to settle things. So all of that is kind of what's actually taken place so far. Who will actually be the winner? I don't know. But let's look at the long term. So China's influence in Europe has actually, it's interesting, has not really grown. I thought it would. I thought that actually that Europe would say, I'm tired of the United States treating us badly, and so I'm going to talk to China. And while China is also tired of it. But the problem, I think, for China is they have been a backer of, not militarily, but they've been a backer of Russia. All right, well, the Russia invasion of Ukraine in Europe is an extremely serious thing. That is one country invading another country on Europe's doorstep. And so the fact that China actually has been roughly supportive of Russia in many respects, at least economically, is not gone over well in Europe, excuse me. So their influence in Europe has not actually increased much. You would know better than me whether China's influence in Asia is increasing. It's obviously, if you look at it on a trade perspective, Chinese trade has increased during this tariff times, but it's increased mainly to other parts of Asia as opposed to the United States, or Europe for that matter. Although actually I guess it has increased some in Europe. So I think that what I don't know is whether are countries in Asia saying, the lead idea from many countries in Asia is there's China and there's the United States, and please don't make us try to pick, let us do business with both. If the United States continues to put tariffs and creates kind of these concerns, would it be a more positive thing for China in that part of the world? Maybe. But of course, we also saw, the United States, President Trump just did agreements in Malaysia and I think with Cambodia and with Thailand and so forth, that actually had part of the agreements were areas that would not be seen as really positive towards China. So I think you ask a very good question. I haven't given you much of an answer outside to say that I don't really know. I know that my view is these are all negotiations, and countries and leaders will make decisions based on what they think is best, and they're not going to make decisions just because they like the United States or they like China. They're going to make it on what they think is best.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps one last question.
Or maybe.
Okay, two more?
Yeah, get the questions together at the same time, and I'll try to do it.
Okay, so please go ahead with your questions, and we will combine those.
Yeah.
And Clay will.
I'd like to ask a quick question. You discussed stable coin. What's the impact of stable coins on the monetary and foreign exchange policy? And another, in Korea, Parliament, we passed the Korea won-based stable coin in the next month. In the will picture passed. What's the impact of dollar-based stable coin and the Korean-based stable coin? How to compete in Korea and world economies? Right now, you talked for soccer and is dominate in the world, but this Korean one-based stablecoin is very limited.
Yeah.
How to compete in the Korean government and Korean bank and other issues?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Yes, please. Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much.
And then you, okay. All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much, Francisco Gonzalez, Embassy of Colombia. And thank you for a very detailed, precise, and to the point in the process, the process of the how to deal precisely on the topics. And my question is about precisely the power of the people, the power of Congress. How does precisely the Congress, the U.S. Congress, affect this process now, next with the election,
Yep.
and in the process 2 to 3 years ongoing? What can we expect from the U.S. Congress in channeling this process?
Yep.
Thank you.
Please, last question. Yeah.
네, 감사합니다. 전부 다 영어로 얘기했는데 영어가 좀 부족해서 저는 한국말로 하겠습니다. 전해 주십시오. 네, 반갑습니다. 달러의 유상에 대해서 말씀을 하셨는데 제일 중요한 게 저는 미국 달러 관세 때문에 영국 식민지 시절에 달러 관세 보수도 찬삭 사건으로 미국 독립운동이 이루어져서 독립을 하게 됐습니다. 그 후로 저는 이런 상상을 해봅니다. 굉장히 극단적인 상상인데요. 만약에 모든 나라가 미국에 수출을 안 한다. 그럴 경우하고 그 다음에 그것 때문에 전쟁이 일어났기 때문에 전쟁이 일어날 수가 있다. 그에 대해서 어떻게 생각하시는지 말씀해 주시면 고맙겠습니다. 네, 감사합니다.
Did he say if everybody in the world stopped exporting to the United States?
Yeah, it says may provoke some sort of war situation
Okay.
and upset to develop.
Okay. All right. Based on the Boston Tea Party, right? Okay. Let me start with the stablecoin question. So I think stablecoins are having an impact. I think you're also starting to see is different countries around the world, I'll come to Korea, are trying to address it in different ways. One of the really important ways is through what's something called tokenized deposits, which is basically to take deposits that are at financial institutions, turn them into a digital form. And this actually allows for central banks who do this on a wholesale basis, so what's called a wholesale central bank digital currency. And so actually, I will say one bragging point about the Institute of International Finance. We are working with the 6 biggest banks of Korea, trying to understand and could this operate? Because it's just, how do you do it on a cross-currency basis? And that's something that I think, so my main point is that there are a lot of different ideas out there on how do you take the digitalization of assets and make them work. And not just make them work in terms of a speculative asset, but in terms of an asset that has stability and you can do trading and work with companies. And so stablecoin is now a leader on that. The fact that you might have a yuan-backed stablecoin, I think makes sense. And obviously you don't have it yet, but it should, once you have legislation, I would think that it will make sense for how to look at it. The question will be is a lot of countries around the world, central banks don't like stablecoins. They just don't like them. And I don't know what your central bank thinks, but that will be an interesting point of view. And obviously, if the parliament passes it, the central bank has to needs to go along with it. The dollar impact is significant, as I was trying to say in my remarks, but that's because there's a lead. As other countries start creating stablecoins that are backed by currencies, or sometimes they're backed through what's called an algorithm, that will probably have some impact on what happens going forward. I think the main thing is the world is open on digitalization, and there's a lot of different things moving forward. on how does the Congress address all of these things? So that was my point on earlier that I was making on politics, which is so far the Congress basically has said nothing. And will the Congress start saying something against President Trump? And I think that if you're a Republican, it depends on does inflation continue to rise? And so the affordability problem is a real problem. And so it's undermining your ability to get elected because people are looking at you as you're responsible for this. If that starts to have an impact on Republicans, there could be a pushback. For Democrats, they're already pushing back. They're fighting on everything now. And so some Democrats actually like tariffs, but the thing is that they don't like the way any of this has been done. Could there be an overall impact on the tariff front for the next few years? My guess is not much. Even if the Democrats win next November, they will be busy fighting other issues. But I think that, again, the lesson from Tuesday, in the United States Tuesday, was if you're not paying attention to inflation and cost of living issues, you are going to lose. And so President Trump and the Republicans have got to take that into account. And tariffs are, by their nature, I mean, they're supposed to be, they raise prices. And so will that have an inflationary impact? Maybe not much, but it keeps prices up. So we were going towards 2% inflation. We're now basically looking like stability at 3%. Well, that's a big difference. So when someone's cup of coffee or their beef prices go up, they're going to be concerned. In terms of the last thing about whether if everybody stopped exporting to the United States, could that produce war? Or maybe it's a little far-fetched. And the reason being is that, and why have all these countries, with the exception of China, not reciprocated against the United States? The reason, I think, is largely, one, the United States has lots of leverage because it's the biggest global economy in the world, and it's an economy driven by its consumer. So, I mean, this year is a little different because we've had a lot of investment into artificial intelligence, but usually consumption as a part of our GDP is some enormous number. It's like 70%, I think. And so that means that we buy lots of things in the United States. And so because of that, if you are an exporter, you are going to continue to sell, and you're not going to stop. And the reason is because your biggest buyer, the United States, is going to continue to buy. And so so that's why it seems a little bit off. That doesn't mean that the way we've treated countries doesn't raise tensions and so forth. I hope, of course, that it will never get to like we're actually, there's one thing to be a trade war or a technology war or an investment war. It's a whole different thing to be a shooting war.
Okay, or set. Thank you very much for your brilliant presentation and stimulating conversation afterwards. And thank you very much, our audience, your active participation in this forum. So thank you, and I very much look forward to having a similar breakfast gathering very soon. And also I'm thinking something like we regularize IIF, IGE joint forum like this in the future to give rich information insight, especially from your side, to our audience.
No, I mean, we want to be here in Korea. We have members that are Korean. We need a few more members, to be frank with you. And but we will, in the meantime, when we come through here, IG is one of the groups that we love to have discussions with, and so we'd love to keep that up.
All right, excellent. Okay.